I'd like to share a few different aspects of Ardha Baddha Padma Pashimottanasana to think about when you're practising what can be a challenging posture. In the Ashtanga sequence, it comes fairly early on, and it can be tricky to navigate, especially if you have tight hamstrings, tight hips, you struggle to sit up, tight shoulders. Like I say, a few different things to think about as you practice. Now, if you're really struggling with this posture, I always suggest to my students that they work with firelog prep first. So if that's you, then hop on over to my other video and have a look. Take the firelog preps first, using blocks if you need to try and access some of that hip movement, and then come back to this video to have a look at the different aspects that I want to highlight. So first up is what happens when we see a picture of this posture in a book, or maybe look around us in class and see that everyone's knee is nice and wide and it's on the floor. So the temptation is to reach for our ankle and pull the foot in. And you end up looking something like this. So knees on the floor, looks great. And then what's asked for next is a forward fold, reaching for the foot. But if you notice, a couple of things have happened as I reached forward there. So the first one is that I come in over the top of the ankle and over the top of the foot. And what that does is it rotates that lower leg inwards. Now, in this posture, what I'm looking to cultivate and make use of is the very small amount of external rotation in the lower leg to help me get a little bit deeper into the posture. So what I'm going to suggest is, rather than coming in over the top of the foot and over the ankle, that you come in behind the ankle, so you're cradling that there. And what that does is it very gently encourages an external rotation there. So the next thing that happened was, as I pulled the foot back and the knee stayed low, this hip swings out to accommodate me putting the foot on the inner thigh there, and allows the knee to reach the floor. So that's not bad in and of itself, but I want to be aware of how much compensation, how much of the posture is being taken up by that movement of the pelvis. Because if it's too much, then we're avoiding some external rotation work at the hips there, which is where we all tend to be tight. And also what can happen is you can see that my ankle's collapsing here to allow my knee to come onto the floor. Ideally, I'm looking for the side of this foot to be up in this groove at the top of the opposite thigh. Now, in this position, and even starting to fold forward, I can feel a little bit uncomfortable, but it's not going to do really much harm unless I've got something else going on in my ankle or my knee beforehand. But if we think about this posture within the context of what's coming later in the Ashtanga sequence, we're going to have to take a half lotus and bring this other leg up to standing. So for Marichasana B and Marichasana D, we're looking for this complex arrangement of the legs. And that's before we even take into consideration the wrapping and binding of the arms. So if we're compromising the ankle and the knee and dodging some of the work in the hip earlier on in the sequence, we're going to feel it more later on when it comes to that more complex movement. And chances are something is going to become uncomfortable over time, whether that be the ankle or the knee. I mean, I have to be honest with you, I feel it pretty quick in my ankle if I'm not in a good, strong position here. So how we can help that, the position of the ankle, before I look at the hip, is we can extend at the ankle and pull the toes back. So what we tend to do is either flex the foot and try and draw that in, or it's just a little bit limp and not much is happening. So if you've got some movement at the ankle, it can encourage collapsing. So what I do is I extend ankle. It's like I'm pointing my foot, but then I'm just going to flex the toes. So I'm pulling the toes back towards me there, and that helps stabilise the ankle so that as I draw it in and try and place it at the top of that thigh, you can see that the knee stays higher off the floor than if I allow it to collapse. But actually, I'm asking more of the hip here. I'm looking for more of the work to come from the hip. Now, it might be that block, cushion, whatever underneath there, if the knee's vulnerable in the air and you're experiencing pain, and that's going to allow the hip to relax a little bit. So, first up, come in underneath. Second, stabilise the ankle as you draw in. Now, the third thing I wanted to speak about was the hip. So like I said, what can happen is if we keep the knee low and pull that foot in, that pelvis just swings out a little bit to accommodate the movement. It's what it does. Okay, so to try and get a little bit more out of this posture and build a more helpful pattern for the postures that come after, I'm going to suggest that you think about keeping the knee high. So rather than letting it flop out to the side, keep it high so that the hip's flexing in before you try and rotate it. And as you draw that knee out or draw the thigh into external rotation, rather than thinking about swinging that wide, think about this sit bone, this buttock here, this hip, drawing under and in. So when we draw in the knees high, that hip's drawing in and under. We're coming in behind the ankle. We can even rock off the sit bones a little bit to help us get the foot as near to the top of that thigh as you can. The ankle's stable. And then when we sit up, the knee moves closer to the floor simply from us sitting up. Now it might be if the hip's tight, the knee doesn't go to the floor, that's okay. But eventually you'll find it does. And even if you can take the bind and start to fold forward, you'll notice that as you fold forward, the knee starts to move towards the floor without having to press or put any pressure under it. Okay, so 3 things to think about when moving the leg into Ardha Baddha Padma Pashimottanasana. So first one, coming in behind the ankle rather than over the top. The second one, stabilising that ankle. And the third one, keeping the knee high and drawing that hip under and up as you draw the foot in. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the bind and what happens with the upper body. So it may be that you can't reach that arm around to catch the big toes. It requires openness across the front of the chest and shoulder mobility as well. So there are a couple of things that you can try. Let me just switch my sitting position here. Okay, so if reaching round, you've gone beyond the elbow and you're pretty close but can't quite get that big toe, think about folding forward. Now, not hunching or rolling forward, because you can see that actually takes my hand further away from my toe, but folding forward from the hips can take me a little bit closer. And if you're still not quite there, then firm grip on that foot. You can start to rotate the body away from the foot towards the bent leg, and that can bring you closer to that foot, and from there you can reach for the bind. Now, if having folded forward a little bit and looked for that rotation, you're still not quite there, a really helpful thing to do is to use this hand to get the bind. So fingers over the toes, and you're going to hook that thumb there. Now, if this is your bind, I'm going to suggest that you sit up tall and not fold forward. If you're working with the elbow, sit up tall, and it might be the knees pretty high. It might even be that the foot is down towards the knee. And you're going to sit up tall, gaze steady. So, looking for the bind. Couple things to think about. If you're near, but not quite, you can fold from the hips. You can twist away from the foot towards the bent leg. If that's still not quite enough to get you bound yet, think about using that other hand. So coming in over the top of the toes and hooking the thumb there, giving you that energetic connection and sitting up tall. Last thing to have a think about when you're practicing Ardha Baddha. If you can reach the foot, but you're struggling to keep a hold of the big toe, so whenever you get it, particularly if you start to get hot and sweaty when you're practicing and it keeps sliding off, a good thing to do, a helpful thing to do, is to flex that big toe. And then you've got something really firm to hang on to there. So if you're not quite fully bound, you folded forward, you've twisted, you're there, then you start to bring yourself back around, but you've got something to help hold the bind there instead of just sliding off. Reaching for the foot and exhale to fold forward. Carefully coming out. So rather than just springing out, lift the knee and straighten the leg. So coming out in reverse, the same way that you went in. So I hope that that's been helpful. It's given you a few things to think about and to experiment with while you're practicing Ardha Baddha Padma Pashimottanasana. Now, as always, if you've got any questions about what I've covered, please do get in touch. Thank you.